Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Economic Empowerment Subcommittee. I'd like to just take a moment to just thank all of our panelists and all of the members of the committee who have dedicated their time. I'd like to thank the staff who's been working very closely with us, Ms. Diaz and Ms. Del Carlo and Ms. Green. Thank you so much for a job well done. And we can actually get started with our presentation. We can move to the first slide. And oh, by the way, I am Representative Sherry Dorsey Walker of the 3rd District and Chair of the Economic Empowerment Subcommittee. The agenda for this afternoon are, of course, the introduction of the subcommittee members, and we shall do that shortly. Then we shall have a discussion about how do we create opportunities for people of color to receive contracts, and how do we become involved with the wealth management opportunities in the state, and what are our top priorities when addressing economic empowerment opportunities for African Americans. So if we'd like to just get started, we can kind of go down the list of those who are engaged with the Economic Empowerment Committee. We can start with Ms. Tanya Williamson, just a quick introduction, and we'll just go down the list from there.
Hi, my name is Tanya Williamson, and I am a relationship coach as well as a business consultant.
Thank you, Ms. Williamson. Representative Bill Bush.
Good evening. I'm Bill Bush. I am the state representative for the 29th District. I'm also the chair of the Economic Development, Banking, Insurance, and Commerce Committee in the House. And my other occupation is I'm an attorney in a small business.
Thank you, Representative Bush. Sir Charlie Weatherspoon. Sir Charlie Weatherspoon, are you able to hear us and unmute yourself for introductions? We can come back to him. Dr. Eunice.
Good evening, everyone. I am Eunice Gwamisia. I am a diversity and inclusion consultant, CEO of eUnity Solutions, and a proud member of Magnolia for 26 years.
Thank you, Dr. Eunice.
You're welcome.
For the Louie Morley.
Hello all, my name is Louie Morley. I'm a small business owner here in Delaware, own a petroleum and energy company.
Representative Mike Smith.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I am State Representative Mike Smith of the 22nd District. I'm on the Economic Development Committee and also have a background in economic development. Thanks for including me in this group. Representative Dorsey Walker.
Absolutely. Thank you for always providing a little bit of comic relief.
One time my phone rings.
Love it. Mr. Rick Deadweiler.
Good day, everyone. My name is Rick Deadweiler. I'm with Corteva Agriscience. I lead the company's government and industry affairs efforts throughout the eastern region of the country. Corteva is a spinoff of the DuPont Dow merger some time ago, and we are the largest US-based agri-science company in the world. I'm glad to be headquartered right here in Delaware, so I'm glad to be a part of the Economic Empowerment Committee. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate you. Ms. Karen Burton.
Yes, good evening, everyone. My name is Karen Burton. My specialty is creating strategic partnerships and alliances and operational management for small businesses and nonprofit agencies.
Thank you, ma'am. Dr. Brittany Hazard. Is Dr. Brittany Hazard? I see her. Is it possible we can unmute Dr. Brittany Hazard for introductions and promote her to a panelist, please? Thank you. And Siobhan White, Ms. Siobhan White. Ms. Siobhan White.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I'm Siobhan White, the Director of the Office of Supplier Diversity for the state of Delaware, and I'm happy to be on the subcommittee.
Thank you. Dr. Brittany Hazard. Can we check on Dr. Brittany Hazard's audio, please? And while we're checking on Dr. Brittany Hazard's audio, we'll go to Sir Charlie Weatherspoon. Mr. Weatherspoon, we're having some technical difficulties with your audio. Are you able to hear us? We're having a hard time hearing you, sir. Chase, are you able to assist with Mr. Weatherspoon? We're having some difficulties with his audio. And can we? Okay, thank you very much. And Dr. Brittany Hazard, are you able to unmute yourself so we can hear you, ma'am? Thank you. Looks like we're having some difficulties with Dr. Brittany Hazard's audio as well. I did want to give everyone an opportunity for introductions. We'll have DTI, that's our technology. Those are our technology gurus to take a look at the audio for those who were unable to introduce themselves. So we'll go right into the discussion items. I did have a conversation with Representative Bill Bush a little earlier today. And one of the things that we were discussing is how do we create opportunities for people of color to receive contracts? I think I've had this same conversation with each and every one of you. I mentioned Representative Bush because we actually spoke on today. And Representative Bush, it was brought to my attention by Caitlin Del Callo, Ms. Caitlin Del Callo, that they are doing research on how do we create these opportunities, and then looking for numbers as well. So we want to ensure that as we start this conversation, if anyone has anything they'd like to share about how do we create these opportunities for people of color. I know that I've had extensive conversations with Rick Deadweiler, and he's been at the forefront of a lot of these conversations. But anyone who would like to share their thoughts, please feel free to do so. You can use the raise hand option, and Ms. Del Callo or Ms. Diaz will ensure that you are unmuted so that you can share your thoughts around how do we create opportunities for people of color to receive, in particular, procurement contracts.
Hi, this is Siobhan.
Hello.
Hi. So one of the things in regards to state contracting, I think if we had some legislative help, that would be great. We don't have any set goals for a lot of the contracting. And also just making sure that our businesses are ready to handle the contracts. A lot of times they don't have the same type of capital, they can't get bonded. There's barriers that prevent them from being able to have the capacity. So those issues need to be addressed as well.
So Ms. White, are you saying that we need legislation for both to prevent some of the barriers as well as helping to prepare contractors of color for opportunities?
We could certainly. I think one of the arguments as to why we don't have, or there hasn't been a push for Delaware to have any goals is that we don't have the amount of businesses here to even reach an attainable goal. And from what I see in the vendors that I deal with, a lot of them, they get certified through my office just to go to another state to get contracts. And so there's something that we are missing here. There is the business. We just need to make sure that we're welcoming to those businesses that are here in our state.
Ms. White, I am hearing your audio and then it goes in and then it comes out and then it goes back in again. Could you repeat those last two sentences, please, ma'am?
So we just have to make sure that we have a more welcoming system to the businesses in our state to do businesses with Delaware, as opposed to we do have vendors. We can have the capacity, the number of businesses, but they are doing business elsewhere, particularly our neighboring states who do have set goals.
Right. You and I have had conversations around the fact that Maryland has set goals. They have a percentage of the number of contracts that must go to people of color, but then Maryland also has the highest number of people of color elected to their General Assembly. So there seems to be a correlation with the two. With Delaware having 8 members of the General Assembly, maybe we could potentially look at the possibility of some goals in the state with your help, with the help of your office, Ms. White.
Absolutely.
Sherry, I'm not sure if anyone can hear me. This is Kyle Myers. Can you hear me?
Yes. Kyle Myers is actually a member of our committee. Could you please introduce yourself? I'm sorry I missed you when we were doing introductions. Please accept my apologies, sir.
No worries, no worries. Hi, everyone. I'm Kyle Myers. Very interesting. I got a knock on my door about 2 weeks ago on a bright and early Saturday morning, and I opened the door. Here stood this tall, handsome, striking man who happened to be my representative in my district, Mike Smith. And we had a great conversation. So hi, Mike, great to see you again as well. And hi, committee members. I'm Kyle Myers. I'm CEO of Numa Capital Group, which is a private equity firm that focuses on making acquisitions of investment management companies across the country. And so we actually own 2 other investment management firms, one in Chicago, one in Atlanta. And this is such an interesting topic to me. And Siobhan, a pleasure to meet you virtually. I look forward to meeting you face to face. I've worked on these initiatives both in Maryland and New York, and we leveraged a lot of what we saw coming out of the Illinois legislative body from over 2.5 decades ago in order to form our thesis for how we execute it. You mentioned having targets. Most of the targets and goals that were established were first, I would say, amalgamated by conducting, it was called the Disparity Study, where a contractor is brought in to look at the disproportionate or proportionate measure of contracts that are going to one certain set of group versus other groups of people, how that impacts MWBE businesses. And from there, the legislative work was able to begin, because without the body of knowledge, we're only guessing on an absolute basis. And these studies generally take anywhere from about 3 to 6 months to get done. In a state our size, I would imagine it could be faster. I mean, in Philadelphia, which has about 5.5 million people, we were able to get that study done in about 6 months. In Maryland, it took about 4 months, and that's a much larger state, but the political will was there to execute on getting it done. What we found is that wherever there's a political will, there's power and there's movement to execute on the strategy. And where there's not, you have to fight a little bit harder.
So Thank you very much, Mr. Myers. No, you're fine. You're fine. We appreciate that. We appreciate that. So you have
And
already
I have
volunteered
much
to
more,
assist with
but
the
I wanna.
disparity study. Oh,
Raise my
appreciate your
hand.
comments tremendously.
Mhm.
And I'm
Yeah, I do
glad
want
that,
to point out, oh, go ahead. I
I'm
do
sorry,
want to
Ms.
point out
White.
that we do have one that is currently, I think there's a proposal for the disparity study to be done. I think OMB is supposed to award the contract sometime later this month. But that one is limited in scope. It's just for construction and construction related projects. And also it's limited to 3 state agencies. So it's not a comprehensive study for the state, but it is a start.
Well, maybe that's something that this committee can work toward, ensuring that we're looking at all of the different departments throughout the state where there are procurement opportunities. And maybe we can, you and Mr. Myers and many other on this committee can be helpful in making that happen. Clearly, the 3 legislators can do what we can from Leg Hall to ensure that that happens. If we need legislation to make it happen, I think I have 2 on this call with us who can, they're pretty good at making things move. Were there any others who wanted to share their thoughts around how to create opportunities for people of color to receive contracts?
This is Tanya.
Oh, sorry.
Yes,
Go ahead,
ma'am.
Tanya.
Okay.
Hi, Representative. Thank you, guys. I appreciate the opportunity. And I apologize because earlier I could hear you saying my name, but I was having difficulties on my end. So, you know, when you've been on here all day long, you know how technology works. So I appreciate your patience with me. I just wanted to say, I'm coming from Sussex County, and I have my doctorate in education. I work a lot in mental health, but I am the board chair of Impact Delaware. So we work a lot with young people as they move up in the ranks of college or profession. And the opportunity that I had to be a part of this group, when we started to talk about those young people have a lot of questions about being contractors, those who are young, those who are new. And what I'm finding is that they run into a lot of roadblocks of who could I go to that may have some information that may help me along the way. So I know earlier Mr. Myers had mentioned about some of the disparities. And I know at least in Sussex, there is not a lot of networking that the young adults who are interested in contracting, there's not enough of that for them that's allowing them to be motivated and encouraged to continue in the field. And so when I recall Miss Williamson mentioning on one of our previous calls, just her energy, her insight, those pieces alone really do cause a big shift in the mindset of whether you hit the roadblock and can continue on, or you hit a roadblock and you feel like, well, I'm not going to be able to move too far in Delaware. And so just coming from the perspective of, you know, individuals who are just starting in that field and young people who really want to move forward, there's not as much networking and just put simply encouragement and motivation behind it, especially being young women and young men of color. And so I just wanted to put that piece out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hassett.
And
Ms. Williamson?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
And so thank you, Dr. Hazard. You know, I think Siobhan, I just love what everyone's saying. And I mean, I can affirm, Kyle, and I love the fact, because we're doing business in Illinois right now, that the legislative body is very different than in the state of Delaware. So we do have 2 pieces that I believe Siobhan has really raised the awareness of. And like, I'm like sitting on edge right now, because we just had this conversation with my girlfriend, who is the first hotel owner, African-American, just signed 7 contracts in Atlanta and 7 cities. And they talked about the disparity. But I think one of the issues that we have really in the state of Delaware, and it goes back to education, Siobhan raised this, and I'm working right now with other business owners on the consulting side in terms of readiness. So the system is complex, but we also need to make sure that we compartmentalize readiness versus disparity. We have an institutionalized issue, you know, with the disparity sector, but when the doors do open, we also have a readiness issue because of how do you put it, the way that our educational system has been designed. Our children are being raised at an entry level position versus an entrepreneurial position. And so we need to make sure that we kind of re-engineer what that will looks like here in the state of Delaware and start to integrate entrepreneurial skills in the high school, at the high school level, in order for them to start doing contracting and be really, really prepared, even if we do make the changes. And the reason why I say that is because I'm dealing with 7 business owners right now, and they don't even have the core fundamental pieces of the accounting, the bookkeeping, the operating agreement, just to get the state certification. Most Black businesses don't even know they need an operating agreement and the LLC. I mean, if you're not fluent on the business sector to know that and you're not doing certification, we just need to get all of that in-house. Like that whole system needs to be re-engineered around the education so that we reach all markets and not just markets that are educated.
So Tanya,
yeah.
If I may, and I like this topic too, because one of the things that we found in the financial services industry is that it's far easier to get a janitorial service contract than it is to get a professional services contract.
Yeah.
And, so I look at an operating agreement for a single member LLC. Why would that be mandatory to receive a contract for a single member LLC? Single member meaning single owner. Now, if you have 5 owners, you do have to dispel why you're doing A, B, C, and X, Y, Z. But going back to your comment or thoughts around education, we also have to look at access to capital, folks that have been historically denied access to capital, which doesn't allow for the individual to afford to pay for the bookkeeping, pay for the operating. A gentleman I just was with earlier today is forming a new business. He has a watch company. He said, Kyle, should I have an operating agreement? I said, well, how many of you are there in business? He said, well, it's just me and me as the business owner, and then I'll have a couple of sales guys. And so, well, you don't need an operating agreement to dispel what your work is, but you should have a statement of your function as the CEO and how you govern yourself in a business fashion. But we've made these high watermarks for businesses that only a handful of businesses even have the financial access to garner. Now, I think he told me that the person that was looking to form his LLC for a watch business, a business selling watches, wanted to charge him $5,000.
Yeah, for that, right?
Yeah. So, and that's an operating agreement. And I said, you can go right online and do your own LLC.
Yeah.
You can go right online and get your own EIN number. Mm-hmm. But this is how his energy, even when he arrived at my home earlier, was already gone.
Right.
So,
and you say, that's why I said the education, we need to have a resource portal with the education that says, literally, you can go here to get these resources, the how to. We need to bridge the gap because, to your point, I think one of the issues is we say that the operating agreement is not a requirement, right? It shouldn't be for a single member, right? However, the financial institutions require it at the opening point. Okay. And however, in order for me to get state certification, at OSD, it's a requirement. And it's a requirement for me if I want to become nationally certified as a WBE or MBE. Everyone's requiring it. And so when they get to those doors, it's a requirement for WBE and MBEs at the national certification level. So what's crazy is not crazy. I don't think that's the right choice of word, is since this is a tier that's being used across the board right now, what do we do to provide some solutions? I mean, I have templates, but for a single LLC, I agree with you, Kyle. It shouldn't be a requirement because it's not that difficult. When you start getting into S Corp, multiple LLCs, then we have those dialogues, right? But that's not the case. So we've been helping some of the small businesses locally say, here's here's an LLC piece, right? Here's XXX, you know, to be able to go through your checklist to make sure you're really prepared. And also, I think Dr. G is on here, the cultural sensitivity piece and making sure that we understand the language barriers of interpretation of law and what they need in order to enter into the contracting. Delaware's system is very complex with regards to contracting. I am an example, and I'm just starting. I do not do business in my own state, right? I'm just starting, right? I'm just not saying that it's a bad thing. I got state certification to go outside of the state. Siobhan is, you know, I've acknowledged that on multiple occasions, but now I want to do business in my state because we're now addressing systemic and institutionalized issues. We have won contracts at the state level on my husband's construction side, but the issues that we've had is there's still there's some issues internally at the state level. And once you see what those issues are, they're gonna blow your mind away. I mean, literally, you're gonna be like, it's not something you've seen, it's just very complex for a very small state. And so those are the things we have to address. So the readiness is key. I think what we talked about, I think if we go there, that's within our control. The institutional and the legislation is outside of our control, but I believe the situations that we provide from the readiness side to be able to help carry over to the policy side will help drive what policies need to be changed on the policy side for the state of Delaware. I mean, that's just because we've been changing policy, but don't nobody know what the real issues are at the beat, at the heartbeat. We can change all these policies, but if we don't educate our people and they're not prepared, the door will open and they still won't have access. Access to capital has always been an issue for us. You know, yeah, so, yeah.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Mike. I'll talk up to you.
One thing I noticed that the state doesn't do a good job on most of the time, right, is anything having to do with marketing. Yeah. I want you to know that, you know, where the information is available, how you access it, the process by which you do things. I think that's a natural thing with bureaucracy, unfortunately. But that's where I think we need to work with, you know, the public-private partnership side of the house with the nonprofits that do that. I mean, groups that I think of immediately are groups like yourselves and also like the chambers of commerce, their economic development committees, to push them out and do more workshops, because that's also how they can bring value to businesses, right? So I think packaging that together and getting them to help is always a good thing. I've worked with the Newcastle County Chamber and the State Chamber. I know Representative Bush has worked with some of the other chambers downstate. We also have the Small Business Caucus, which we're on as well. And I think that's another way we can use that as a conduit to do something statewide. To your point, policy is policy, but if we can't get the information out, then really what's the difference? So I think if we can use workshops and use it in a public-private partnership type of way with the nonprofits and the chambers, that's probably the best route to go, because that can create the marketing arm we need.
Gary, this is Clay Hammond.
Yes, how are you? I'm glad you were able to join us. Clay Hammond is also a member of the subcommittee.
Provide some historical perspective. I was a member of the Governor's Supplier Diversity Council going back as far as Markel. One of the things that that really troubled us was half of the state's procurement activity never sees the light of day. It's under bid threshold. It's roughly almost $1 billion. And one of the things that we were trying to identify was how do we get our community involved in that? And one of the major things we ran up against was the culture. These are buyers that have been in office 10, 12, 15 years, that when you have to get 3 quotes, are calling the same businesses. There was a company called Snow's Painting that never bid on anything, that did $8 million a year in contracts. So one of the things I think we need to look at is really how do we change the culture. But it's important to note that going back as far as Governor Carper, there has never been a comprehensive disparity study. It's always been very limited and targeted. And I think the political will is just not there to do it, because I think what would happen if they would show that there's been tremendous obstacles to folks, the state would be required to do set-asides. and I don't think they want to do that. Because again, it's been tremendous discrimination against our businesses and procurement activity. Now, I think that's part of what the Legislative Black Caucus and Black business community needs to come together, because there's been significant intentional impediments to our getting in the contracting opportunity. Because the state of Delaware purchases almost $2 billion a year of goods and services. I mean, that's significant for a state our size. So I think that's one of the things we need to promote also, is really begin to let the governor know that we need a comprehensive disparity study, not on construction, because there's a lot of other products and services the state purchases besides construction. And one of the things we found in construction is that if the opportunity exists, there's not many contractors that come through the door. One of the things we were looking at was bringing in contractors from Pennsylvania and Maryland so we could really increase the amount of business we do in the area of construction. So those are just some things I think are important for us to look at. So that's just my little 2 cents worth.
Appreciate that. Ms. White mentioned about the disparity study. Dr. Eunice?
Yes, thank you, Representative Sherry. I could not agree with you more, Mr. Hammond and Tanya and Kyle, everything everyone has said, but I'm always gonna take it back to cultural awareness, like Mr. Hammond just said. Regardless of how we are going to do this and what studies we need, I strongly believe that in the state we live in and looking at the history, that we really need the study, number one. But secondly, while we're waiting to get approvals or do the study, it really needs to start at the policy level, with each and every one of us contributing a piece to that legislation through the Black Caucus and through the Economic Empowerment Committee. Because we can talk about education. We have a standard education. Not everyone is going to go from regular education. Some will come in through trade education, some will come in through different types of educational routes. So once they get to where they're going, do we have the resources in place for them to sustain what they have gained? Even if we give them all the access that is available, are we giving them the resources and the tools to sustain what we have afforded them? Which I believe is one of the problems that people of color run into. Yes, we get this money. How do we manage the money? What resources are in place to help us? Resources that are also culturally sensitive to help us, because I'm not gonna do business as a Black woman, like a Caucasian female, or maybe a Hispanic. Maybe there's areas that I'm lacking in. So it's a total package that we need to look at. But very key is that culturally sensitive approach, because there is history, there's lack of trust. We need to rebuild that trust to begin with. And if we're gonna walk this journey, it's not gonna be a fast-paced journey. It's a little bit at a time, but we have a lot that could be done with these meaningful conversations right now. But I just wanted to bring it to our attention as we look at all these resources and the different venues of gaining economic empowerment, that we keep in mind that we have lost trust over hundreds of years, that we can now begin to rebuild that trust prior to even engaging our own brothers and sisters into business and teaching them exactly how to walk that walk. It might seem so minute, but it is something that we need. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you.
Excellent. This is Rick Deadweiler. I wanted to make some comments.
Yes, could everyone please mute so we can hear Mr. Deadweiler? Thank you so much.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you, Representative Dorsey Walker. And I really appreciate all the comments that folks are making on the call or with the committee today. And a couple I'll reinforce, but really I'd like to approach this discussion as we talk about economic empowerment to add in the economic development component from a competitive nature. Knowing economic development that I've worked with state projects, whether it's the work that the state on to retain a company like DuPont or any of their spin-off companies, and the energy and effort that goes in to compete, quite frankly, with other states throughout the region, whether it be Pennsylvania, Maryland, New Jersey, New York, knowing that those other states are also working to entice or invite companies, large companies, who are either considering moving to a new location, or they're new companies that are looking to develop and site their location somewhere. The states take on a very different level of activity to invite and work on and massage and develop the relationships of having those folks in place. Developing infrastructure capital support for those companies because they want to compete to keep those or to have those businesses sited in their state. Another tool, incentive dollars, whether it be tax relief, research incentive dollars, if the company's doing a significant number of research investment into the company, the state considers ways of creating a tax incentive or relief for those companies, depending on how much they plan to invest. There's employee training dollars that the state will consider, building capacity with those organizations to make sure that if they decide to cite their business in Delaware or retain their business in Delaware, they're strengthening the capacity of that company so they can shore up the opportunities for success. So I share all that to say, I know that we talked about a disparities study, kind of looking at where we fall behind. I think we also need to look at this from a competitive standpoint and benchmarking other states from around the region that we find ourselves competing with. And I would say as far north as Vermont and as far south as North Carolina, Virginia, those states. Because when a company is interested, I mean, look at the type of the energy that went into trying to ploy or entice an Amazon to locate their facilities here in Delaware. A lot of energy went into that, and the amount of work to develop a package to have that company site here because of the economic impacts, which is what we're talking about here. This creates economic impact, economic empowerment for a group of folks who have been otherwise disenfranchised. There needs to be a concerted effort from a competitive standpoint. And that's what I want to emphasize here. How are we competing with other states? I heard Siobhan White earlier mention that Maryland has some pretty competitive programs that encourage minority Black businesses to stand up and ultimately find themselves being successful there. We talked a little bit about that political will, but more importantly, let's take a look. What might Pennsylvania have in place that supports Black businesses? What might New Jersey have in place? And we should be benchmarking against those states, just as we would if we were looking to pursue or compete with the siting location of a major company. This is for the larger base of Black-owned business opportunities that we're discussing today. So benchmarking is the underscore of my comments, and competing regionally or even more broadly throughout the East Coast.
Thank you, Mr. Detweiler.
Hi, everyone. This is Karen Burton, and I'm sorry, I just talked over someone. Who did I just talk over?
Clay Hammond.
Just me.
I'm sorry, Mr. Hammond. But at this opportunity, everyone, I'd like to have the floor. So I have listened to the comments that everyone has put forth before the members this evening. And let me just point out a couple of things in support of. Siobhan, I do have a question I'd like to position to you, but don't answer it right now because I want to finish my statement, but at the end, please answer. So with your new role with the state of Delaware, are you able to actually target specifically the African-American businesses that are going after the various components in the industry? For instance, contracting. The other one would be from a standpoint of operational management or business consulting services. Are you able to give us an idea of what percentages of those of the contracts are available? Is it 23%? Is it 24%? So that we can see where the highest opportunities could be at for African-American businesses who are in positions to apply for, and how many of the African-American businesses that are in your database that have applied for this, and what are some of the comments and feedbacks that you are hearing from those African-American business as to why they were not accepted or did not receive the opportunity when they put that bid in to get awarded that contract. I think if you provided us that background information, that would help us tremendously. Tanya, I remember on a call that we had, I guess last month, where you said you literally did a report to which you were contracted by the Office of Minority Businesses for the state of Delaware to understand what all of these disparities are that we are all talking about in this conversation right now. And you also offered to supply that information for someone to review. So if you have that content, what already shows what the problem is and what the solution is, why are we not tapping into that, as well as combining that with Mr. Myers, Kyle? You also said you did a report that looked at what legislators was doing in Illinois, looked at other areas. You already have the template of the tools for success and the steps that we can use. Why don't we look at this information that we have, everyone, and then begin to say, how can we apply this to the state of Delaware? Now, I will tell you this, in my tenure for the city of Wilmington, in the mayor's office of economic development, for the minority business office, we did target the minority businesses that were actually with the city of Wilmington. They were under our supplier diversity program. This is what we did. We reached out to the National Minority Supplier Diversity Council, which services Delaware, Maryland, and New Jersey, which basically says this: if your company gets certified with us, then you have the certification that says if you go for an opportunity in New Jersey, in Maryland, in Delaware, in Pennsylvania, we have already weeded out the ones that have the capacity to deliver, so that they are not just looking to bid and put in proposals on the public side of government, but also on the private side in the corporations. So the National Minority Supplier Diversity Council has already dealt with a lot of the issues that we're talking about where we need to fix in Delaware. So having a voice and having a conversation with them, I think would be awesome, in addition to all this other information that we already have, including what Clay Hammond has already said of the work that he has done and how he has brought it to the attention of the predecessors of past governors of what needs to work. We are still in 2020. The issue still remains the same, but we need to focus in on what are attainable goals and what are realistic and what steps we can do that is not going to overwhelm anyone that's on this call as volunteers to get progression to move forward.
So,
okay. So now, Ms. Siobhan, can you comment?
So,
Sherry, can I?
Oh.
I'm sorry.
Mr. Hammond, is it okay if we hear from Ms. White, because Ms. Burton asked her some direct questions, and then we can all kind of continue our discussion thereafter? Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. So to answer your questions, one of the things that really bothers me with my position is that, no, I don't have a lot of say when it comes to the contracting and the data. And I think Clay hit it on the head before when he said that there are a lot of, I'll call them legacy employees at the Office of Management and Budget who makes these decisions. One of the issues that I've come across and that I'm working on is getting the data. There was a data request that came from the Delaware Black Caucus, and I had to go through hoops to get this. They have to pull from here, they have to pull from there, how many minorities and which the, you know, how many contracts went to minorities in this agency. They can't get the information. It's not cohesive. And so, but I think at this point, it might be intentional. And that's something that we need to work on. If we can't get an answer, a simple data question answered, we can't fix the problem. And so if they don't see that there is a problem, they can't fix it or don't want to fix it. And so It's just me working with Division of Accounting, me working with government services, support services, and making sure that we have the information we need to make sure that we know who's getting these contracts, how many minority businesses, who needs the help, who has the capacity. One of the things I want to say about the NMSDC is I put in my budget proposal for this year, I asked for money for grant opportunities for businesses to become part of NMSDC or EMSDC, which is the regional affiliate. There's a cost associated with that. If we provide the money to help these businesses become a part of these, they can have a lot of networking opportunities, amazing network opportunities, not just within the state, there's corporate partners, everything. So that's one of the things I hope I'm able to do for our certified businesses. But yeah, like you said, one of the things that I feel like we need to do is there needs to be an overhaul at the Office of Management and Budget on the contracting side. I will go on record to say that.
Ms. White, I would like to thank you for your candor on that, because as you mentioned, you feel that it's intentional. And it's pretty interesting to hear you say so.
We keep having the same conversation. So if we keep having the same conversation, then it is intentional.
Sherry,
and I want to respond to Karen Burton. Is that okay? With regards to just a few of the statements. And Siobhan is absolutely right. So no, I was not retained by the Office of Supplier and Diversity, Ms. Burton. The Minority Council from Maryland came up and partnered with the NAACP and the Middletown NAACP. I was at the time sitting on Associated Builders and Contractors because my husband's construction company, and because of my business expertise, they requested that I speak on Delaware State University's platform for the Economic Development Council to share the disparities of findings. I actually went to the University of Delaware, and because I'm pursuing a doctorate in business and because I am a consultant, I knew how to retrieve through critical thinking and methods the data from the state behind the scenes with regards to drawing out data elements over a 4 to 6 week period that we produced to Michelle Morin at Delaware State University, along with Alicia Clark and a whole lot of them sitting in the audience, that they were literally blown away to see the disparity as it relates to Africans and African Americans, as well as the change in the executive order and the lack of education and disbursement with the educational spend across the entire state. So that's how that came about. And that was in October of 2016. Today, just so you're aware, because I'm running 3 companies, we have to retrieve that information from archive, but I'm in the middle of exporting my services to 3 countries. So I did reach out to Representative Sherry Dorsey and said, look, I got this data. I do understand. And no, Michelle Morin, when she sat down, she herself was blown away with the data, start taking notes to determine how she can try to influence, but she wasn't as transparent as Siobhan just said, and said that she could not retrieve certain data herself. So the data that was compiled, she was able to produce based upon the prerequisites of what the state is requesting. And so as a result of that, that's the information that I'm willing to sit down with Sherry Dorsey, Siobhan and team, and map out in a half-day session, because my schedule, I travel tomorrow morning, I'm out of state, I'm building in North Carolina, so on another project. So it's the timing of what's happening, and that's why we haven't had a chance to meet. But secondly, I think one of the pieces is we're able to talk to these in layers, because there is that sustainability piece, but also most Black businesses don't know about the National Supplier Diversity Council. That's really where you get your corporations, because at the end of the day, those corporations don't recognize my local OSD certification. They want to see that national certification. And whether that's with WeBank or NMSDC, I'm doing business in Vegas, but they told me I need to make sure I register on the East Coast here in order to do business out there. So that is an educational gap. That's number 2. Number 3, it is the cultural piece. We were awarded a contract. I'm going to say this once more. by the state specifically, but once it got there and they identified that it was an African-American distribution and we identified some challenges. Remember, I mentioned specifically, then we terminated ourselves from the contract because the state breached the contract. And because we're familiar with the federal laws, we enforced them to actually send us a check within 48 hours because they breached the contract because they wanted to outsource it to a vendor out in Maryland because it was a set aside that was already statute for them. And so I think we're just dealing with, there's a layer of things. And so I do agree with you, Karen, when you talk about bringing it to the table, but we're going to have to take a phased approach with this because there's so many elements. To Dr. G's point, there's so many elements. That's why I suggested, I reached out today, Representative Sherry, right? I reached out today. I was like, look, my schedule is horrible right now, you know, and I said, listen, can I just get one day in your office and we just do a brain dump and we'll break it out and sit down, you know, Siobhan and team or whatever, can we just do a brain dump, a strategy session? Because you have so many moving parts. And that's what Michelle Morin had taken from that session, because it's not about a blame game. We got people who are in position that are not qualified and don't understand diversity and distribution. And so we need to put restrictions on how frequent a contract is turned over to the same vendor, you know, whether it's prime. I mean, there's several layers. So when you're looking at compartmentalizing that, we can't tackle all of it at once, but we can prioritize and develop core people to run who are qualified in order to change legislation in the state. I mean, we have a lot of issues here and the complexity is ridiculous. And so, I mean, that's, you know, just to respond to you, it's not that we're not intentional. It's just that that data has to be archived that we have. I could talk to it like the back of my hand because it was a $36 million spend. 7% only went to African Americans in the state of Delaware. 7% were only certified in the state of Delaware out of the entire spend for that year. And most of them were SBF businesses, small businesses that were switched over because they're under the criteria of 7 million over a 7-year period that were being calculated in that spend to show that we increased our number of spend to minority-owned businesses, when in fact we didn't. It's just that they fell under the executive order as a minority business. So we have to do a whole lot of, we got to look at a whole lot of components at this point, but that's not going to happen overnight. And we have December coming up, you know?
Sherry, can I jump in?
Absolutely, Mr. Hanna.
I agree with the sister. It's intentional because, again, if we do the disparity study that looks at the whole spend of government contracting, a legal remedy for the disparity study might be set aside. That is not, they do not want that to happen in Delaware. One of the things that we looked at was I ran a business in Maryland for 5 years, and Maryland has one of the premier programs in the state, in the nation. In that the relationships they had, if you look at the casino construction, they had goals throughout the whole construction operation. I mean, but the reality is in Delaware is that we cannot replicate the Maryland program because it has aspirational goals. And based upon state code, you cannot have aspirational goals in construction. I mean, in procurement. So one of the things we ran against was when the state did its annual spend report, if they did $5 more than they did last year, oh, it was a great thing. It was wonderful. It was phenomenal. But it was not based on anything that would really lend itself to a significant increase in minority business utilization. So one of the things we need from a policy perspective is change the Delaware code so we can have aspirational goals and really look at replicating some of the initiatives that Maryland and other states have done, whether it's Illinois or Maryland. But until we eliminate the prohibition against aspirational goals, you know, you spend 10 more dollars than you did last year, and it's a victory. And that's just ridiculous.
I mean, Clay, you put it nicely. You said it nicely.
You know, Sherry, and to the point that Mr. Hammond just made, you take a place like Illinois that holds every month their Senate hearings where the accountability function is executed with all executive directors of divisions and department heads who control the spend for that department head. they have to sit in front of a Senate body and the state Senate, and they have to defend the lack of progress in their ability to find minority asset managers, minority broker dealers, minority legal services for bond counsel, minority construction contracts, although Illinois was always pretty good with giving out construction contracts. The idea, though, is that unless you can have a target that is the ability to legislate at least a target, doesn't mean you have to get there, but it means that we have to think about what do we want to achieve as a state? Who are we as a state? When then Senator Kathy Pugh in Maryland, was looking to produce Senate Bill 606. We looked at the fact that 33% of her population, the state's population, were minorities. So 33% of the state's business should be done with minorities. And that became the clarion call for how do we get a thing done. But without being able to have some, to Mr. Hammond's point, something to, I don't want to say force a target, because you can't force diversity and inclusion because folks will cry reverse racism. But you can say, hey, we just want our body of business to look like the representation of our state. Now, what does our state look like?
You have to get those affiliates, and you have to get those affiliates here, because construction, everyone knows, doing Whitehall construction or doing business with Whitehall construction in Maryland is not the same as doing business with Bacini and Polo in Delaware, Poland in Delaware. What I mean by that is that you have one company who already has a diversity and inclusion metrics, but you have one company who doesn't distribute the same because of the climate. Why do you think that they're building so vastly here in the city of Wilmington? Because of the climate. They have the ability or the flexibility to do that because of the climate. And what I mean by climate is all of those construction pieces, if you're not with ABC and you're not within that, and I've sat on the council, they've admitted, we're not there yet. We're not there yet. We're not there yet. Well, you got to get there. You know what I'm saying? And they'll lag out intentionally the delay where minority contractors can't stay in the game long enough because they'll intentionally hold the payment. And a small business or a small construction firm can't afford that risk because they have to pay their suppliers. It's like a person living from paycheck to paycheck when they accrue a job or a size of that job or magnitude without capital because we lack it. So, I mean, these are like, I mean, I love having this discussion, but like I said, to Clay Hammond, we gotta be very intentional, but you gotta know the climate too. You gotta play ball. We need to have the legislation, I forget her name, the one who legislates on behalf of ABC, who sits at the table to make sure certain legislation is passed, to make sure that it affects. She needs to be sitting here. When we talk about distribution of construction, she needs to be sitting here because some of that legislation is being driven by the component or elements of that culture that does not include diversity and inclusion.
So it takes me to this point. I'm sorry. It takes me to this point, and I'm listening to each and every one of you. Dr. Hazard, I'm gonna come right to you. We mentioned that, and I heard all of you mention in one form or another about contracts. And the state has these low bid contracts where they will give the contracts to these particular contractors. Well, they do work in my district and it is slipshod. It is the absolute worst work you've ever seen. And each of my constituents who's had to deal, and I'm not going to mention the contractor's name right now, but at the end of the day, why is it permissible to do this kind of work in my district, but you would never do it in another district or any place else in the state? And then you come back and tell me because it's a low bid contract. No, that contractor should not be on the list if that contractor doesn't see the value in going into any community, regardless of what the people look like, and doing the work effectively. The same is, here's the situation right now at St. Francis, and it's all institutional. And I'm listening to each of you, and it's so sad because it is intentional. intentional, as Ms. White stated. And then now what's happening is Black Lives Matter has taken the mask off of what has been transpiring in our country down through the years. This is modern day Jim Crow. St. Francis doesn't have any African American doctors in the ER. That's unconscionable. St. Francis sits right in the heart of my district. 60% people of color live in the district, 40% Caucasian. So help me understand how you don't have any African American or Hispanic physician, I'm sorry, African American physicians. You just hired a Hispanic last month. But this is 2020. Why is that okay? And why are these policies allowed to be perpetuated? The other thing that really disturbs me is, and I heard one of you mention about the legacy employees. I think it was Ms. Williamson. The legacy employees, it's like these individuals, their great-grandfathers worked in these departments. And guess what they did when they passed on the legacy of being able to work in these departments? They passed on the mindset. And so what we have to do is get to the heart of the king and the queen to help them to understand that there's a big pie everyone can eat. But the problem is when they feel a level of infiltration, because that's what we represent to some of these other folks, there's a sense of infiltration versus elevation, and we can all eat. So I just wanted to share that really quickly. And yes, we need to work on changing the Delaware codes, and that's something we could potentially do through Sunset. And I sit on Sunset, as does Senator Lockman, who's also a member of the Delaware Legislative Black Caucus, and there's strength in numbers. And I think Dr. Hazard had a comment.
Yes, thank you, Representative Dorsey Walker. I appreciate that. And it's amazing because everything that you just said was what I was thinking. Part of that was what I was thinking. A lot of it comes down to our ability to recognize the value in our work as minorities, our ability to advocate, and for us to challenge what the status quo. I mean, whether you're looking at construction, education, and business, there are concerns there. There have always been. I think someone said earlier, we're in 2020. You know, why are we even having this conversation? So of course, it's going to make you come across and believe that it has to be intent. However, if it is intent, then there should be that same amount of intent to make things better and more equitable for people of color. And so when you have young people coming up, I think it was Miss White and maybe Miss Williamson, and you were talking about how do we improve readiness. If you look at individuals who've been doing this for years and they feel a sense of defeat and they are successful, how do we encourage younger people who look like us to even take on this type of journey? And so with that being said, I just wanted to put out there in regards to opportunity, at least starting at a different level, there is some minorities of color who are beginning to the process of a trade school. And what they talked about is what's needed. And after listening to you guys of your expertise, I'm blown away and I'm taking notes so that I can share that it's so much more than just the business side and the construction. There's levels of education and pieces of policy that we can't just teach these young business owners or contractors to go in with your skill. They need to know the ins and outs. And so I really do appreciate you guys' expertise, but it's very clear we have to be honest with ourselves. If we want to do better, then we have to recognize our value. And we have to challenge these entities that over, 20, 30 plus years have overlooked certain things that we know is there, that we know is needed. If you're doing good work, you need to be given that respect. And people can paint pictures however they want to paint them, but that's really what it comes down to. Thank you.
Pardon me, Representative. There's been a request from IT to do a sound check for Mr. Weatherspoon.
Okay. Can we?
Sherry, can I say one thing?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Mr. Weatherspoon, we can hear you, sir. Mr. Weatherspoon, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you guys.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Mr. Weatherspoon.
Okay.
Floor is yours, sir.
Thanks.
Oh, okay, you just wanted to do a sound check?
Oh,
okay.
yeah, you just wanted to check. Yeah.
Okay. I think it was Mr. Hammond who wanted to jump in.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing, Sherry. You talked about shoddy work in your community. A contract, the language in the contract awarding says lowest, most responsible bidder. It doesn't have to be just the lowest bidder. And if they're doing shoddy work in your community, you need to reinforce that most responsible bidder, because that seemed to me that would eliminate them to do that. Also, I wanted to speak to what the sister was saying. We've got a tremendous dean at the Delaware State College of Business. And one of the things we've been talking about is how do we create the next generation of entrepreneurs? In the construction field now, I was on the ABC's diversity committee for years. One of the things we're seeing is tremendous opportunities. We've got a whole generation of tradespeople retiring. So we've got a tremendous opportunity to get young folk, young Black folk and brown folk into those trades. So we've been talking about how do we begin to impart the whole concept of entrepreneurship? Because for too long, we were telling our kids, go to college, get a good education, and you can make a great living in the buildings trade. So we're actually talking about how do we do that and begin to address the entrepreneurial mindset of a lot of these kids, because they really do have a tremendous entrepreneurial mindset. So just to let you know, I think Del State can be a tremendous resource in making that happen, because not only from the standpoint of the contracts they award, but also the vision of Dr. Mike Casson, who's Dean of the College of Business.
And he's at the table. Thank you so much for that, Mr. Hammond. He's at the table with the African American Task Force. So and Del State is actually where one of the co-chair for the African American Task Force, the overarching umbrella for our entity, is the Chief Counsel at Del State, Mr. Cleon Cawley. I wanted to also share something with you, Mr. Hammond. You mentioned lowest most responsible contractor. It is very clear that when you have a new sheriff in town, that the sheriff is going to be monitoring what's happening in the community, and they now have clarity on the kind of work that needs to be done in the 3rd district. Now I'm speaking of right here, right now. So 2020 has brought about clarity, but it's the sad part of this is, let's go back to, why is there a Caucasian overseeing African American affairs for the state of Delaware? So we have to go to the root of the issue. And I'll tell you, I was on a call with Director Maria Matos, and one of the things she said is, the first thing they'll say is, let's do a study. We'll do a study on the community. And in the process of doing the study, you're spending $500,000, however much we're spending on the study. Well, that's money that we could have actually given to a person of color to be a contractor. So I understand that we do need to make sure that we have these studies in place, but if they've already been done, then why do we need to continue to study our community? Why are we not implementing some policies to ensure that people of color have opportunities?
And I agree with you.
I agree with you. And to play Hammond, because I just came off of ABC when I had to start traveling 2 years ago, and we started the dialogue. But a lot of people don't also, we need someone here from Department of Labor, because, you know, for small businesses, they don't even know that there are certain trades that small businesses can partner with the Department of Labor, where they will actually inject the income or partner with the business to do the career pathing, the education piece, and pay for them to further their education. That information is disclosed throughout certain parties. But if you're in that business and you have someone who needs additional training, ideally some small businesses can't afford to send people to further pursue their education. And through those retention efforts, the Department of Labor is receiving a federal grant that can partner and inject that as a partnership, as a value add to those small businesses, so that African-American businesses can move forward. And I think that someone there from that team needs to be on this economic development, because a lot of that can ease the weight or the cost of certain small businesses believing that they have to help pay for certain certifications, certain skill sets, to get the person that is really good at the work that they do. They just don't necessarily have the certification or the academic piece of it, but the Department of Labor does have funding that partners with small businesses to do that.
Thank you, Ms. Williamson. Secretary Kay did ask to be a member of our committee, so we shall be adding him.
Yeah, that's good.
Thank you so much for that feedback.
And I'd like to, everyone, just, hi, I'm actually live on the computer. My own IT.
Ms. Burton, before you get started, I would like to be mindful of the time. I just looked up, and because we're having such a robust conversation, I just want to be mindful of, we usually try to schedule these for an hour. Now that I pretty much have all of the committee members, does it look like we need to do an hour and a half per meeting if that works for each person's schedule, each individual schedule? And then Ms.
Absolutely.
Burton, I'd like to go straight to you. Okay, I just want to make sure that I'm mindful of everyone's time and being respectful of that in the midst of trying to shift policy in our state.
All right, I just wanted to also bring, because I want to go back to your comment, Sherry, about the contractors that's working in your district, you know, and again, working with.
Not anymore, but go ahead.
Not anymore when they were, but again, when I look at my tenure with the city, and I remember, you know, you have your prime contractors who then sub the work out. And I remember my nephew looking at the job and then going up into the Department of License and Inspection where he could pull the permit to see exactly how much it was. And this is what his comment to me. He said, "Aunt, I'm not bidding on that." And I said, "Why not?" He said, "Because I can't eat." So in other words, there was not money put to the value of what he was bringing as an electrician in as a subcontractor to do the work. So when that prime bidded on it and decided that I'm now going to go into the list of the MBEs that the city has this listed, and I'm going to make a selection of who they are, I'm going to give them this small portion of the pie. And one of the things that we always talked about in those meetings with the minority businesses in the city was, you know, it's so sad that each one of you all are all bidding against one another for this small slice of a bigger pie. And so what ends up happening is, because you're coming in low on your numbers, you're not really providing the wage and the salaries for your workers that they truly need to have. So when you see them out in the community working, they're working for bare minimal. That needs to be addressed. I want to make sure that that's something that we also think about too when they sub out. When a prime decides to work with subcontractors to sub out the work, that we're looking to ensure that the pieces of each one of it will be able to make sure that these contractors are able to fully pay their employees the salary that they deserve.
You're so right about that, Ms. Burton.
Sherry, can you also check with the city? Because when we tried to certify through the city of Wilmington, I believe it was 2017, the system was broke. So we actually had to work with them over a 9-month period. I actually went into the office over a 9-month period where they said they had a backlog where at the time, the young lady who was now at University of Delaware said that she's literally 9 to 12 months behind on applicants. So if that's changed now that Mayor Purzycki is in office, what does that look like? Because I know that was just in 2017. So we chose not to take the path of the city of Wilmington because the system and the backlog and the resources that they had to allocate contracts was not even accessible, and it was broke.
Okay, so I can comment on that.
Yeah.
Because well, I'm going to say this first and foremost, it's because I left that office. And once I left, it did not run the same.
Yeah, way. They said it was just, I was just like, oh my gosh, we had to, I didn't, at that time, I didn't even live in the city of Wilmington, right? At the time, I just wanted to do business because I had business in the city of Wilmington, but the system was broke.
Well, what ended up happening was with new administration becomes new directors, right? And so those directors did not see the value of what the MBE office was doing for the minority businesses. And then they decided to, again, place someone in a position that was not qualified to deal with minorities. They didn't even have a focus on it. They didn't even understand it. They didn't even understand it before they became the director, and they were just a deputy director or acting director or in a lower position in the mayor's office of economic development. But they got promoted up to become director and still don't understand the role that African Americans or minority businesses play in all cities.
I thought that I was the only one that observed that over the last 2.5 years.
No, so again,
we have a local city. We have a city issue as well, Rep.
Yes, ma'am. Oh, we definitely do. Prayerfully, it gets shifted on, well, Tuesday or something like that, sooner than later. That is the prayer. But nevertheless, I don't want to digress. Just really quickly, we are really on topic number 1. We haven't even gotten to the second topic. So what I'm thinking is we may just have to do one topic per meeting, because I do want to be mindful of the fact that we have individuals from the public, we have constituents who are present, and they would like an opportunity to speak. If everyone on the committee agrees, maybe we can hold the next topic, the next few topics for the next meeting, and give the public an opportunity so that we can have so we can have an opportunity to hear from the public. Do all the subcommittee members agree to that?
Yes.
Agreed.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Del Calo or Ms. Diaz, are you able to see who from the public would like to have public comments?
Yes, Representative. There are two people who have raised their hands indicating they'd like to make public comment. So I will unmute them one at a time.
Thank you, ma'am.
First, we'll have Gilmore Crosby. You will have 2 minutes to speak. You are muted.
Thank you. Well, I'm not sure how I got invited to this meeting, but it's been great to listen to, and it gives me hope. And I just got to say to Representative Walker that I agree with you 100%. You don't need another study. You already have plenty of data right in this group. This group has plenty of data. And so I have spent my life using Kurt Lewin's methods of social change and organizational change. I'm 61. I started in 1984 doing this stuff. My father before me in 1953. And so he was part of the Connecticut State Interracial Commission in 1946, working on economic equity in the state of Connecticut. And there are methods for how to decrease the restraints in the community, you've named many of them, and increase the likelihood of successful implementation. They already exist. And so I would love to just help convey that type of information to this committee at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Mr. Crosby. That's exactly why you were invited.
Gilmore,
Economic
I would love
equity.
Mr. Crosby, I'd love to have an opportunity to speak with you. I too have a background in organizational development and leadership. And so I can see that in your background. I'd really like a chance to speak with you on this topic.
Okay, now I'm going to unmute Kyle Shepard. Mr. Shepard, you will have 2 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Hey, can you all hear me?
Yes, sir, Mr. Shepard, we can hear you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, good evening. I just want to make a few quick comments, some of which were mentioned at the last general body meeting last month. One overall thing I just want to mention was consider the potential overlap within alignment of coexisting efforts that have similar outcomes that's going on today. So at the same time, there's currently a Reading Consortium meeting on funding and governance, and just think about how both this task force as well as that legislative creation are both tackling the social determinants of health between education and economics, and figure out what that could better look like and streamline. Another is to maybe consider make available running definitions in terms to make sure that there's mutually reinforcing language. So this task force is called the African American Task Force, but what does it mean when a lot of the language within the bill or recommendation is talking about persons of color? So persons of color is broad, like who are we talking about when we say that, just to keep that in mind. Another thing is regarding wealth. So when we say wealth, what does that mean? Because it means different things to different communities, especially if we're talking about inequality. Also, I would say previous meeting recommendations were to discuss current national and state literature and recommendations to make sure that they're aligned with the desired outcomes of this task force. Another is to include incentivized people who are within the community currently impacted by the inequity and social determinants of health, like figure out what that looks like at the zip code and census tract level. Some last things I would say about creating opportunities for people of color is figure out what the baseline is. I echo what Karen Burton and Clay Hammond were discussing earlier. Just we have enough reports, we have enough studies out there, just use what we have. In regards to wealth management, I would figure out the implications. What does it mean for like Jeff Bezos and Amazon to thrive at this time? And at the state level within Delaware, what does it mean for some of our nonprofit industrial complexes to be doing good while some of our nonprofits have had to close their doors. So like, what does that mean exactly? And my last comment is just regarding our top priorities, I really would encourage us to adopt a framework that has to include clearly conveying the effects of structural racism on economics. If we don't include that within the work, we're always going to be talking about individual accountability versus systemic overhaul. And we're always going to be playing catch up. Thank you.
Mr. Shepherd, thank you so much for your comments. They're right on point. You're greatly appreciated for being present for the meeting today.
Thank you.
Ms. Diaz, were there any other individuals from the public who would like to make comments?
Representative, I do not see anybody else from the public who wishes to speak.
Okay, thank you,
however, there is one member of the subcommittee who has their hand raised. I didn't know if we needed to circle back to them or not.
Yes, please, Ms. Diaz, if you wouldn't mind unmuting that member of the subcommittee.
So that member is Mr. Charlie Weatherspoon, and he should be able to speak.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Yes, I think the great technical assistants you have, they put that up so that I could test. But anyway, I think it's been a great meeting, and I think there's some exceptional talent at the table. I think the thing that I've seen in the past is that you want to start with your North Stars. You want to really collect the number of strong businesses, or if there are any in Delaware, who are doing certain things, and let them kind of help you, lead the way. Because I know a few of them who've been around for a long time, they get exhausted by the fact that, they keep coming up and they keep, not getting a shot, and they stop trying. So I think we need to really address that exhaustion and trying to get people reinvigorated to step forward again and find out who they are, and so they can gain our trust that this is not just, as we say in business, just another one of those meetings. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weatherspoon. Appreciate those comments.
Pardon me, Representative, there's still one more member with their hand raised.
Yes.
And that is, I'm sorry, I'm not sure.
Louvie. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Diaz.
Great conversation. I'm super excited. I know we're here supposed to try to help everyone else. I'm like, man, Siobhan can help me. Kyle can help me. so I just wanted to chime in and just say that learned a lot from this. And Siobhan, I sent you an email. I just hope to circle back with you away from here with the issue I'm having with my company, because like you're saying, access to opportunities. So I have a petroleum company, and you would think it's easy. You get certified, everybody uses fuel, but it's a lot more difficult than you think. So many barriers are in place. And I just have a question around that when it comes to certification. So I sent you an email, and hopefully we can chat offline about that. And then Kyle, my last question was to you. Do you have access to RICS capital? Because the issue I'm facing now is prior to COVID, I was able to subsidize my company by fixing and flying airplanes, but that has since slowed down. Now the challenge we're having, yes, we have 1 or 2 contracts in the pipeline, but we have to survive till that contract comes to fruition, And in conversations with the Small Business Office, Small Business Administration, and just having access to capital, they want to see, okay, how good is your credit score? With me, I have a decent credit score, but hey, where's the income to pay this? I'm like, no, my business plan, when this contract comes in and this, that's the cash flow we're going to be able to use to kind of grow. So I think now I'm kind of pivoting and having that RICS capital conversation. So when you mentioned you had access to capital, I was very interested in at least having a conversation, exploring those opportunities.
Sure. And Louvie, aren't you Emmanuel Isaka's friend? Did we meet through Emmanuel?
That's the first thing I was about to say, man. I'm like, yo, I know this guy. Yeah, tell him to give me some RICS capital, man.
Yeah, exactly. No. So listen, do you still have my contact information? And if not,
I should.
All right.
I'll drop you a note.
Drop me a note, and let's circle up tomorrow, as early as tomorrow morning.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And that's what that's the nature of it. We all come together and work together. We can overcome a lot of the barriers that have been put in place. We can rise above them. So I would like to take a moment and just thank each and every subcommittee member for the job well done. We have our work cut out for us because we know that we are up against systems. But we know that together there's strength in numbers and that we can rise above any situation that we face. So I'd like to just take a moment and just say thank you. Job well done. There's still more work to do, but I thank you for your willingness to come to the table for such a time as this. Everyone have a very good evening, and thank you to our technology support as well as Ms. Diaz and Ms. Del Calo and Ms. Green for always being helpful in the midst of storms. Natural one going on right now in Wilmington.
Thank you.
God bless you.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Be safe.
Likewise.